In a significant move for media accountability in South Africa, the Press Council has appointed seasoned journalist Phathiswa Magopeni as its new executive director. She's the former editor-in-chief of the SABC News and brings a wealth of experience to her role. She takes the reins from Latifa Mubara, who served the council for over a decade. And according to the Press Council, this appointment was unanimous, recognizing her as a worthy successor. Magopeni's leadership at the Press Council begins in mid-February. Let's talk a little bit more about what it means for the future of media in South Africa, particularly media oversight, but also for her personally. Joining us now, the newly appointed Executive Director of the Press Council, Phathiswa Magopeni. Almost feels as if we need a bit of a drum roll there, Phathiswa.
I think so.
Good morning.
Right. Good morning. Good morning.
You excited?
I am excited for the industry and the work that we need to do and the road ahead, looking at all the developments in the media landscape, both locally, continentally and globally.
One of the big reasons for the existence of the Press Council is to ensure that there is media accountability, but also that we keep interference, state and government interference at bay. So it's that delicate dance that needs to happen. And I'd like your thoughts just at the outset of where we are right now in terms of both those two almost seemingly opposing forces, although we should be working harmoniously together.
Actually, you need both to function effectively as the media sector. Basically, what the Press Council does is balancing the need for the media to have the freedom to do its work, which is derived from the Constitution. So in doing so, you also have to account to the public for the nature of the work that you do and how you do your work. So that's where the balance comes from. But then you also have to focus. For instance, if you start with freedom of expression, you've mentioned the instances of censorship, harassment of journalists, and you are seeing a lot of legal action against journalists. But it's more about making sure that the environment is conducive for journalists to do their work. So it's the hygiene issues that the Press Council has to address. And the second part is about accountability, which is where the adjudication complaints processes kick in. Basically, it's ensuring that the public is treated fairly in the way it's covered. So that side deals with editorial due diligence. It also deals with due care in the way journalism is practiced.
And of course, you have the press ombudsman who is right now a judge, a former judge, Bernard Ngwepe. Is he still in the role? Am I information
He actually deals, no, there is a press ombudsman who is in charge of the adjudication process, and there are two deputies that work with the press ombudsman. It's only when there are appeals that Judge Ngwepe comes in who heads the appointments, the appeals.
And it's important because, as you say, there is that ability for the public to bring their issues into that forum. Just talk to us a little bit more about the work between the Press Council and the Press Ombudsman, and where the public can have expression in those two.
Remember that the Ombudsman is appointed by the Press Council. Then there's a judge that chairs the Press Council, Judge Fritz Brandt. And that's a person who's in charge of the Press Council. And then you have the Press Ombudsman, who works with the two deputies. But before you get to the Press Ombudsman, you have a public advocate, which is where your first your complaints go first. For instance, if I lodge a complaint against you, so I would go to, as a media entity, I would go to the Press Council, I state my case, the public advocate deals with the first interface of the process. And when that happens, we may end up with a satisfactory resolution at that level. But if there are issues that still linger, it's when, it's at that point that it goes to the Press Ombudsman, and then the adjudication process, the formal adjudication process takes place. But it is not a legal process, remember. It also helps the public to actually get their matters dealt with without having to incur legal costs. So it helps in that manner.
And I think the importance of what you're saying there, Phathiswa, is we live in a context now, and I'll go to some of the numbers around, the relationship between our public, really, and us as media practitioners, talking to issues around trust, talking to issues around information and disinformation, that the public understands that we do hold ourselves accountable, that there are institutions and bodies that give them recourse to be heard in instances where they might disagree with something that we've done or said.
Yeah.
But I want to go to some of the existential threats, right, to the media profession as a whole. I know that you have strong opinions on these as well. We've seen the hollowing out of news organizations, and for years and years, Phathiswa, I've seen you on stages talking about things like the juniorization of the newsroom, the dearth of qualified and trained media practitioners, the lack of, and of course, staff cuts that we've seen happening across the industry, eviscerated, and that leads to a diminishing of diversity and also thought plurality, because we need a diversity of views in the space as well, because we're made up of a diverse community of people who live in South Africa. How do we deal with these challenges on ensuring that we have journalists who are treated well, who are remunerated well, who can maybe even go back to the beat journalism of old, focus on on an area, become specialized, but also then provide and have the support to provide the public with the right kind of information?
Okay, the first reality that the media is confronted with is sustainability. That we know. Because of the fragmented audiences that are sitting in all sorts of spaces. So it's not like when you used to have your primetime bulletin and everybody would be watching, and then advertisers would capitalize on those audiences. Yeah. The landscape has changed significantly to the extent that newsrooms are struggling to remain viable. And usually what we've seen across the board is that the first thing you do is to cut staff. And actually, it's usually a problem because it means that you are affecting negatively the quality of your output when you cut your staff.
So it's counterintuitive in a way.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive. So that's a problem that newsrooms are struggling with. And in some of the cases, we've even seen several entities moving away from providing what is core. What we've seen is we see a lot of what we would call previously facts journalism. You rely on press statements, and that's the only thing that you go with, like breaking news, this thing has happened. There is no in-depth treatment of issues as we would have seen in the past because of the lack of capacity in the newsrooms. So that deprives audiences of the quality of journalism that they're supposed to be getting. It's a huge problem.
Yeah, and it's the messenger. And if the messenger is malnourished, under-resourced, can't get to where they need to go, whatever the public gets is as a result of that endeavor. And so it doesn't, it makes sense where mistakes might be creeping through, which then create this corrosive effect on trust and the relationship between the public that we serve, their right to know, and the way that we practice.
But talking about malnourishment, the other problem that we see is lack of editorial oversight in newsrooms.
Yeah.
The juniorization is one part, but the fact that you don't have oversight or adequate oversight in your news gathering and news processing processes is a huge problem, because what it means, stuff tends to slip through and you get to see things that are not supposed to be on air, or that are not supposed to be in print, or that are not supposed to be on digital platforms. So it is a huge problem. And where it becomes a problem for the public, they cannot tell what is true and what is not true, particularly when it comes from branded media, or like institutional media.
Yeah, like legacy media.
So if we make those mistakes, how is the public supposed to tell what's wrong when they actually get to see defective material on social media?
And Phathiswa, it's not only about the facts, for example, alone, where, information might be relayed incorrectly, like infactual information. It's also understanding the editorial aspect of a story. What is the real guts of the story here? What's the real angle? What's really being said? Does this headline reflect what the story is supposed to say? And I've heard endless complaints, by viewers and readers and listeners and so on. The story doesn't resemble the headline. We're going for, it's almost, clickbaity.
In fact, there was a story that came out in December, just after Christmas, and it was all over, to the point that even some government officials were using that information. about 7.2 billion rand being spent by South Africans on alcohol within 2 days or within a number of days, which was untrue. But everybody was going with that as fact, including officials from government who were using that information. It is a huge problem. It is a huge problem.
There was a Reuters piece which reflected misinformation concerns that the public shares, according to a digital news report. It says that those concerns around misinformation from the public's perspective is around 81% in South Africa. That is, that is a huge number. The global average, by the way, is around 59%. We've seen many campaigns, especially in the lead up to elections last year, identifying the difference between disinformation and misinformation, what is deliberate, what is accidental, but where the fact-checking is. Talk to us about that relationship and why it's so important, the trust relationship between the media and the public it serves. And we've seen, of course, sponsored media, interference in media depending on who is pulling or handling the purse strings, vested interests in the way that headlines manifest or stories are pursued. There's a whole corrosive cocktail at play here.
And in fact, what you're saying about information disorders, because that's what they are, the biggest problem is that we claim as a media that we provide news and information that assists citizens or the public to make informed decisions on their daily basis, on the daily basis. So can you imagine if that information is defective? What happens when they have to use that information to make... This is where trust and confidence in the information that comes from the media is crucial. It is crucial. But again, it means that the onus is on us as the media, the press council in particular, to ensure that the levels of media literacy in the public domain are elevated. Because it means that we need to start talking about how to discern when you see content that is suspicious, or how do you even determine that that content is suspicious to the extent that you ignore it, you don't use it for making decisions.
So how are you going to influence that process in your new role, Phathiswa, especially in a context of AI and algorithmically forced bias?
Actually, AI and all these new tools have a two-pronged problem to them. In fact, one is a solution, one is a problem, because you can actually use AI tools to streamline your newsroom processes. For instance, if you have to write basic information like your headlines, writing stuff that you're going to post on Twitter from the content that you have, and scheduling stuff that's supposed to go online. But where you have no editorial oversight that's adequate, it becomes a problem, because everything that you're going to use from AI tools means that it has to be checked. In fact, there's an added layer of editorial responsibility and editorial oversight that's required if you're going to do anything with that kind of information. But the role of the Press Council in this case is that we need to start running workshops around how to detect that kind of information, meaning that our members, 400 plus of them, need to start running these campaigns like Q&As, frequently asked questions. How do you determine, or how do you detect, what do you do when you come across this information, such that you don't even share defective information? Because we've seen a lot of people that you would consider knowledgeable sharing information that is not supposed to be shared.
Or you have this, there's almost like a populist train that happens. One person who I might like and trust shares something. Because I like and trust them, I share it too. But the onus is on every person in that network of sharing to do their own individual due diligence, because things move very quickly. Eventually, it has that snowball effect. You're sharing something, it gains so much momentum. The truth is almost unrecognizable from the source. We've got to slow things down.
True. We've got to slow things down, and which is why media literacy campaigns are important in this case. And in fact, the fair values, media values that the press campaign espouses, is about factual content, it's about accountability of the media, it's about independence of the media, which is crucial, and it's about responsible media in the way we conduct ourselves. So running campaigns and training programs around that is important, not only for the media houses themselves, but also for the public to recognize what's defective and what's not defective in terms of information.
So, Phathiswa, what might be harder? Because we know that we love to hold politicians and everybody else accountable. We'd like to hold people's feet to the fire. What happens when it's one of our own? And that's what the public wants to know. When your journalist posts a story that is wrong or makes an allegation on based on source reporting, which I'm not a huge fan of personally, by the way, based on source reporting that turns out to never have happened, what are you guys doing with that person?
And in fact, we have had entities that have been expelled by the press council. But that's not the starting point. It's when every avenue has been explored, which is from the public advocate's responsibilities to the press ombudsman and to the appeals process. If at the end of the process, one of the members still feels that they have no business complying with whatever ruling would have come out of the appeals process, because that's where the rulings are final at the end of the process, then we expel, because it means that you don't want to comply with the processes of the press council, because the problem with that is the public looks up to the press council to ensure that the media is held accountable. When we have members who don't want to be held accountable, it becomes a problem, not only for the press council, but for the public as well.
Yeah, because I will say hypocrisy.
Yeah.
But we'll be watching you closely. We wish you well. Good luck, Phathiswa, and we'll see what else is happening, especially when you're dealing with a world that is rapidly changing, especially in terms of AI. Phathiswa Magopeni is the Executive Director of the Press Council of South Africa. And we're talking about her role, the role of the Press Council, and also the state of journalism and media in South Africa right now.